Well, here's one way in which Scotland is leading the world. MSPs have unanimously committed us to the world's toughest targets for tackling climate change. The ambitious goal is to cut greenhouse gases by 42% by the year 2020, a tougher target even than Germany. Tonight, the California Governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, has praised Scotland's ambition, saying it will encourage other nations to step up to the plate. But what difference can Scotland really make? And has Holyrood left itself a get-out clause? Here's Kenneth MacDonald.
So, if you look this way, all we get is a blob for your face.
Perhaps they'd picked the wrong kind of day to convince the Scots that global warming had a downside, but at Holyrood they were preaching to the converted. They'd come for the biggest mass lobby since devolution.
This is the first ever climate mass lobby of Parliament, and it's an absolutely crucial day. This is the Stage 3 debate today. This is when the bill will get passed.
Stop Climate Chaos Scotland had brought together more than 70 organisations from Scottish civil society. They wanted targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions to be as tough as possible, as soon as possible. And there was an emerging consensus among the parties to give them much of what they wanted.
It's absolutely critical that this bill showed the urgency of the need to act, and only by having a strong interim target was it ever going to do that. So I'm actually just delighted that 42%'s got through.
It's quite big.
It was a day so perfect, even the Labour Party's windmill needed a little assistance, or as one observer put it, it was the wrong type of hot air. But this is a deadly serious issue. Climate change is happening, that is beyond doubt. Precisely how much humankind is contributing to global warming is less certain. The trouble is, if we wait for all the data to come in, it could be far too late. So the debate was no longer about whether to cut Scotland's emissions, but by how much. Originally, the plan was for a 34% cut by 2020. 2 days ago, the SNP amended that to 42%, but for the Greens, only a 50% cut would do. In the end, that was a target too far for the Greens, but then no party got exactly what it wanted.
This is a signature bill for this Parliament, the most important bill it will pass in this session, perhaps in any session so far. It falls short of what might have been, but nonetheless will have a significant impact in helping Scotland play its part in tackling the challenge of climate change.
I didn't persuade people of all the things that I wanted, all the changes I wanted to see in the bill, or indeed my party colleagues did. But I think we made very significant changes. And we did that not by saying we are right and you are wrong, but saying how can we take this forward in a way that really does improve the bill.
But all sides wanted to stress the national, indeed global significance of the legislation they were about to approve.
The environmental challenge which we face is unprecedented, and whilst we may get off relatively lightly in Scotland, there are other countries, particularly in some of the poorest and most heavily populated parts of the world, which face devastation unless a significant and early reduction can be achieved in the volume of greenhouse gases emitted from our terrestrial activities.
Everybody has accepted, despite the fact that we are, as a country, relatively small contributors to the grand scheme of things in terms of emissions. However large or small our relevant contributions are in terms of emissions, we have a duty to make a contribution to that process at this stage.
Is there a catch? Potentially several. The biggest is an option to scale back the targets if there's no deal at the next Global Climate Conference in December. Another catch? We're talking about Scotland here. For the climate change lobby, the passage of this bill is cause for celebration, albeit qualified. But there is an inconvenient truth. Scotland is a small nation, and one without a foreign minister. Won't big nations like China and the United States simply kick targets like these into the long grass? Because so far, curbing emissions has been a long, slow process. The Kyoto Protocol was once hailed as the planet's best hope. The original framework was arrived at in 1992, but it wasn't until 1997 that the protocol itself was agreed. It was another 5 years before the UK ratified it, and it only became legally binding in 2005. The United States has never ratified it, and some countries have been allowed to increase their emissions. Nevertheless, Scotland has set itself tough targets, not just a 42% cut by 2020, but 80% by the middle of the century.
The difference it'll make, I think, more than anything else, is that it'll set out a map of where we need to be headed. Business leaders have been just as vociferous in this call for targets as the whole of the NGO, church and other sectors. And they need the parameters, they need the guidelines, they need to know what the rules are in order to know what they actually need to be setting and what they need to be achieving. So I think everybody's been looking for a clear steer on where are we headed with this legislation, and I think we've now got that.
Now comes the push to cut emissions from activities like power generation. Some technologies are proven, others, like carbon capture and storage, still in relative infancy. Nuclear energy has been touted as one source of low-carbon power, but most environmentalists appear unconvinced.
What we have in Scotland is such remarkable potential for renewable energy that nuclear power would just be a distraction. It would undermine our possibility of achieving the targets through renewable energy and energy efficiency. And if Scotland is to help the world more generally by exporting technology which can help, that will have to be renewable energy technology.
If these targets are to be met, Scots must change the way they live. Whether we succeed or fail, the outcome is likely to be our biggest legacy to future generations.
I'm joined now from Edinburgh by the Green Party MSP, Patrick Harvey. Well, Patrick Harvey, I bet you've never been praised by Arnold Schwarzenegger before.
I'm sure it wasn't personal. The commitment, though, and the recognition that other countries are already giving and will continue to give to the position that Scotland has adopted today is hugely valuable. Scotland can be pleased, not ecstatic, but pleased with a strong climate change bill, clear targets. The job for us all, those who've argued for these strong targets, and it's the external campaigners and activists who can take credit for this, not the political parties, even my own. The job for us all now as activists in Scotland is to continue to protect this target, because as your report makes clear, ministers retain the power to weaken this target if they see fit. My fear is that they will say in a few months' time, we need a stronger UK target, we need a European deal, or we need more devolved powers, and on that basis seek to weaken the target. We must protect against that, because if the signal of adopting strong targets is good for the rest of the world to see, the signal of weakening those targets would be hugely damaging in the run-up to the Copenhagen negotiations in December.
Right, but there seems to be a sort of competition amongst everyone to set tougher targets at the moment. I mean, just to inject a note of scepticism into this, looking through the actual bill, it was very thin on how any of this could be done.
Yes, that's certainly a weakness, and it's one that I've criticised before. The delivery plan, the government's climate change delivery plan, which was published last week, is an accompanying document which sets out how they think they can reach these targets, the policy measures that they need to take. Now, at the moment, that's based on the previous target, before the amendments today, which was 34% by 2020. We clearly need to see some strengthening of that. And I think we need to see less reliance on technology and more on behavioural and economic change. We need to transform our economy to a low-carbon one rather than just think that technology will solve every problem.
Right. I mean, I was reading paragraphs about things like burning heather on the hills, which, you know, I dare say might help, but it's hardly going to change the world, is it?
Well, on its own, it wouldn't change the world, but certainly the way that we use land. Land use is, whether agriculture or other aspects of land use, is a significant aspect of Scotland's climate change emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. We do need to focus, though, on energy generation, on energy waste, and on other aspects.
Running out of time. Why do you think it's wrong to focus on technology? Because the emerging consensus, for example, in America, and you must be very pleased, presumably, at the attitude of the new Obama administration, but the overwhelming focus there is, right, this is a problem, let's find the technology to solve it, whether it be electric cars, in their case, new generations of nuclear power stations, even genetic engineering.
Well, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm a gadget fan. I love technology, and when technology can help us, that's great. But we can't rely on an assumption that, for example, carbon capture and storage will work. I hope it will, and I want to see investment in that. if it's technically and commercially viable,
Okay.
it will have an important role to play. But we can't rely on it yet, and the Scottish Government seems determined to push ahead with new coal-fired power stations
Okay.
before they know if it can
All right.
work.
Well,
That's
well-
not something that's acceptable.
We'll have to leave it there. Paddy Harvey, thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to tell you, I can only give you the Scotsman's front story. It's leading on climate change. And that's all for us tonight. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, good night.